History has given us some excellent rivalries. We think about Hamilton versus Burr, Red Sox versus Yankees, Alabama versus Auburn, Rocky versus Drago, and then there's Roth versus traditional. I'm jesting a little bit, but there are some pretty deeply seated emotions regarding the Roth versus traditional debate. When saving for retirement, is it better to use a Roth account or a traditional account? And that's not a question you can just answer at face value. There's lots of information you need about who you're saving for, what tax bracket they're in, what their income will be in retirement, what's their income now. There's so many factors that influence the decision of choosing a Roth account versus a traditional account. First, we want to be clear, when we talk about Roth versus traditional, we're talking about the tax treatment of the account. We're not talking about the accounts themselves. The accounts are things like IRAs, 401ks, 457s, 403bs. Those are accounts. Roth versus traditional is completely about tax treatment. So we're not going to talk much about the actual account types in this post. And more specifically, when we ask the question Roth or traditional, we're asking, do you want to pay tax on the front end, which would be a Roth account, and then the balance grows completely tax-free and withdrawals are tax-free? Or do we want to pay tax later and get a tax deduction when we make the contribution, allow for tax-free growth, and then pay tax when we make our withdrawals? That's a traditional account. And the primary reason this is such a hard question to answer is because we know taxes now, we know what their rates are based on income, but we don't know what they'll be in the future. You don't know if your income will be higher or lower than it is now, and then you don't know if your income is going to be taxed at a higher or lower rate when you begin making withdrawals in retirement. Now, the best way that we found to sort of teach this or approach it is to evaluate things on a case-by-case basis. We'll run through some scenarios in this video and talk about which one might be better for you, a Roth or traditional account. First, let's talk about traditional IRAs. And basically the way a traditional IRA or 401k works is you get a tax deduction for any money that you put in the account. It's then allowed to grow completely tax-free until you make withdrawal. At the time of withdrawal, you pay income tax on whatever balance you pull out of the account. Now, initially you might wonder, if it's all subject to income tax anyway, is there really any advantage? Well, the truth is there is, and if you do the math, it shows that. On the screen, we've got a table that basically shows how a $2,000 annual contribution that grows at a rate of 12% per year does over the course of 10, 20, and 30 years in a traditional account, and how it performs in a taxable account. Because the traditional account grows tax deferred for years and years, it outperforms the taxable account. Now, to be clear, the amounts on the table have not been subjected to tax yet. The traditional account would be subject to income tax on anything withdrawn. In the taxable account, taxes have been withheld from the contributions, but no taxes have been paid on the capital gains in the account. All right, next let's talk about Roth accounts. The way a Roth works is you forego a deduction on the front end. Basically, you pay income tax on anything you put into the account, but like a traditional account, the account balance is allowed to grow completely tax-free. And the big difference with Roths, when you make a withdrawal, all withdrawals are completely 100% tax-free. All right, so on the screen we have the table again. This time we've added a Roth column. Again, this is a $2,000 annual contribution with a 12% rate of return. And on the surface, it appears the Roth isn't any better than a taxable account. But remember, we haven't taken any taxes out of this yet. You can kind of see the impact that tax has on deferring or being paid on the front end when you make contributions into these accounts. Now we want to show you what the table looks like after taxes have been withheld. So the Roth hasn't changed any because all the tax liability has already been committed and paid. On the taxable brokerage account, taxes have now been paid on all the capital gains that were inside the account. And then on the traditional account, taxes have been paid on every dollar that was removed from the account, because every dollar within a traditional account is subject to income tax. Clearly, the taxable account is the loser here. That's because every dollar in the account was taxed in this case. You probably also noticed that the Roth and traditional accounts ended up at the same amount. Now, in this scenario, we assumed a 12% income tax bracket, and this kind of highlights an important mathematical principle about Roth and traditional accounts. If the tax rate and rate of return are constant in a Roth or traditional account, the overall value in the account over time will be the same regardless if you use a Roth or traditional. So said another way, if your tax rate remains constant, there's really no benefit in one account over the other. Roth and traditional will produce the same exact result. Now, some of you may be squirming in your chair a bit, and I think I know why. We're going to highlight a reason why that may not be the case in just a little bit. But first, we want to run through some other scenarios to evaluate Roth versus traditional. Hey there, I hope you found this video informative and helpful. If so, please click the like and subscribe buttons below. They help our channel to grow and help us to teach other people about personal finance. All right, our first scenario is you are in the 0% tax bracket. Now, technically, there is no such thing as a 0% tax bracket. However, Even though the first $11,000 you make in 2023 is subject to a 10% income tax, you also receive a $13,850 standard deduction. Basically, this means you have no tax liability for the first $13,850 of adjusted gross income that you realize. In this scenario, it would make 0 sense to contribute to a traditional account because you get a 0% tax break for it. There's no tax break. Why would you do that? No doubt in this case you want to go with a Roth because you effectively pay 0 tax on your contribution and the withdrawals will be completely tax-free later. In a way, you get the same triple tax advantage you'd get from an HSA, but you get it in a Roth account in this case. That's pretty unique. Now you may ask yourself, how am I supposed to contribute to a Roth IRA if I'm only making $11,000 a year? That's a great question, and I don't know the answer to that. But I do know there is a difference between having a low income and a low taxable income. If you understand taxes well enough to lower your taxable income exposure to this amount, then more power to you. I would do the same, and I feel like others would too. But I also feel inclined to remind you that you must have earned income to contribute to a Roth account, be it in an IRA or a 400 plan like a 403b, 457, or 401k. There are probably not many people who can make contributions in this super low income range, but we want to cover everything. Scenario number 2, you are in a low tax bracket now, but expect to be in a higher tax bracket in retirement. This scenario is similar to the first one. Why would you forego the opportunity to pay a low income tax now, just so you can pay a higher income tax later? So let's assume you're in the 12% tax bracket now, but in retirement you expect to be in the 22 or 24% tax bracket. That means every dollar you contribute to a Roth IRA will be subject to a 12% tax, but when you make the withdrawal, you will avoid a 22 or 24% tax. That's going to save you 10 to 12% of tax in every dollar that you withdraw from the account in retirement. And this is another reason that Roth accounts are so popular for young people. When you're just getting started out, your income is typically lower than it will be when you retire, so it makes a lot of sense to use a Roth. You may also be persuaded to use a Roth if you think income taxes will increase dramatically in the future. Okay, scenario number 3. You're in a high tax bracket now, but you expect to be in a lower tax bracket later. This is probably where most people find themselves if they're saving for retirement. As far back as I can remember, I've heard financial advisors suggest that you should expect to spend about 80% of your working income when you reach retirement. I'm not going to debate whether or not that's accurate. Let's just assume it's true for the moment. If this is the case, then you would expect to realize a lower income in retirement than when you're working, meaning you should probably be in an equal or at least a lower tax bracket. As a result, it makes more sense to take the tax deduction on the front end when you make a deposit and then pay tax in retirement when you're in a lower bracket and make the withdrawal. And overall, if you're in a high tax bracket, odds are traditional accounts will make sense for you. Scenario number 4. You think you will be in the same tax bracket in retirement that you are now. Now, we've already done the math and shown you how that if your tax rate and your rate of return remain the same, there really is no advantage between Roth or traditional. But that's not exactly true. Mathematically it is, but there's another step people don't always think about that we want to talk about now to help you make this decision. The truth is, when tax rates are equal, both when you make the contribution and when you make the withdrawal, traditional accounts probably are better, and here's why. The reason that traditional might be superior to Roth when tax rates are equal is because of the progressive tax system. In the United States, when we're taxed on income, we do it in brackets. And basically, the first around $11,000 you receive in income is taxed at 10%, and the next 35 or so is at 12%, and there's another chunk that's taxed at 22 and then 24. Now, the important thing to note is that whatever your marginal tax or highest tax bracket is, doesn't mean all of your money is taxed at that rate. So for example, if someone fell into the 22% tax bracket, not every dollar they make is taxed at 22%. Some of it's taxed at 10, then some at 12, and then some finally at 22. The truth is their average tax rate is probably closer to 15%. To illustrate this, we're going to use our friend Average Joe. We're going to assume that last year Average Joe made $115,000. You can see on the table the way that Average Joe's income is taxed progressively. In other words, the first $10,275 that Joe made was taxed at 10%. That means Joe paid $1,027.50 for that bracket or that amount of income. The next range from $10,276 to $41,775 was taxed at 12%. And Average Joe paid $3,779.98 in tax for that. The next bracket, 41 to 89, paid a total of $10,405.78. And finally, the 24% bracket, Average Joe paid $6,221.76. Now, it's lower than the bracket below it, so the 24% tax rate less was collected because it's only collected on that bracket of income between $89,076 and $115,000. As a result, average Joe's total tax liability is $21,434.92. We've also put this in a stacked bar chart so you can kind of visualize it easier. You'll notice the bottom section is taxed at a lower rate, but it begins to fill up. Then every dollar that's made above that is taxed at 12%, then 22 and 24. I like to visualize it as like a bucket with lines on the side of the bucket to show how deep the water is. The more you put into it, the more is taxed at the top. So Curt, why are you going all this trouble to explain tax brackets? Think back to when you make a contribution to a Roth or traditional account. Now, if you make a Roth contribution, you receive no tax deduction. But what you're passing up, what you're foregoing, is the tax deduction at the marginal or top tax bracket that you're in. So in average Joe's case, that was 24%. So let's say you put $1,000 in, you're foregoing a $240 tax deduction at a 24% tax rate. All right, now fast forward to retirement when you begin making withdrawals. You're no longer working, probably. Most people don't in retirement. You begin making withdrawals from these accounts. When you start realizing income from those accounts, that begins filling up your bucket again. In other words, it's taxed at the very bottom. So go back to that $1,000 you put in earlier. If you made a traditional contribution, you got the tax break then. Now you'll have to pay it when you pull it out. Well, the good news is if it's the first $1,000 you pull out that tax year, it's only subject to 10% in tax. That means you would have saved 14% or $140 in this case in taxes. And even as you realize more income in retirement, you're going to have to realize a lot of it before you get up to that 24% bracket. And you won't be worse off until you go past it. In other words, until you push beyond that 24% bracket and begin to pay tax at a higher rate than you got the deduction back when you made the contribution. In other words, when you take a deduction on a contribution, it comes off the top of your tax liability. When you pay tax and make a withdrawal, it starts at the bottom of your tax liability. Now, this is a lot to take in, so let's run through another scenario to help drive the point home. All right, consider Progressive Pete. Pete is 30 years old and has a taxable income of $100,000. So here are some assumptions we're going to make about Pete. We're going to assume that in retirement, Pete's income will also be $100,000, $35,000 of which will come from Social Security, and $65,000 from retirement accounts. At age 30, Pete is in the 24% tax bracket and expects to be in the same tax bracket in retirement. Pete's annual assumed rate of return is 10%. And finally, Pete plans to contribute $5,000 a year to an IRA for the next 30 years. Pete is trying to decide whether or not he's going to use a Roth or traditional IRA. If Pete uses a Roth account, he'll deduct any applicable taxes from the amount he contributes to the Roth. So in this table, you can see how Pete's portfolio performed after all tax obligations were met. You'll notice immediately that the traditional account outperformed the IRA, even though Pete's tax brackets remained the same both in retirement as when he made the contribution. In this case, Pete's average tax rate was 15.3% in retirement. At the time he made the contribution, his marginal tax rate was 24%. Under this set of assumptions, clearly the traditional IRA is the way to go. Now, we had to assume a couple of things in this scenario. Obviously, it's unlikely that your income in retirement will be the same. It's also unlikely that tax brackets will be the same. In retirement, you may have pension income or other income from other sources that could drive you into a higher tax bracket. And there's also no telling where taxes will be years from now when you enter retirement. Okay, so what do we do? This is me personally speaking. We've been saving and investing for 17 years. I have waffled on the Roth versus traditional topic probably more than anything else. There have been times when we've been full go on Roths and times where we thought traditional would be the better way. So ultimately we've decided to do a little bit of both. This way we kind of hedge our bets, not knowing what taxes will be in the future. We'll have a little bit in each type account and get the best of both worlds. Now I would say if I'm in the 12% tax bracket, this is a no-brainer. I'd also say if you're in the 32% tax bracket or above, it's also a no-brainer. You should probably go traditional. But many of us are in that 22-24 range where it's a little harder to answer the question. And furthermore, you should consider how state income taxes impact this decision. If you think you may move in retirement to a lower income tax state, maybe traditional is the way to go now. If you think you might move to a higher income tax state, maybe Roth's the way to go. There are so many factors that will impact this decision. Now, I know that's probably a lot to take in, and we really didn't answer your question specifically, and the truth is we can't. There's just so many factors. None of this is meant to be financial advice for you individually. This is just to help you think through things and evaluate your own decision. Of course, we recommend reaching out to a professional if you need help for that. Now, we have a lot more information on our website, martinmoney.com, about Roth IRAs, traditional IRAs, 401ks, all that stuff. Go there and check that out. We'll put some links in the description below that will be helpful and related to this post. You can also check us out on our social channels, which we have on the screen. As always, we're grateful for your time and interest in what we're doing. God bless and take care.